Dragons, pirates, and a book written as letters, but not the one that you think. May was a great reading month for me, and I feel like I found a comfortable pace to keep going. I finished my spring reading challenge and have made a lot of progress on my other reading goals as well for this year. So yeah, welcome to my May reading wrap-up, and let's get into it. I was very excited to start this month with the book that I had been waiting for. It is part of one of my favorite series at the moment, and that is the Temeraire series by Naomi Novik. I'm currently in book 3, which is Black Powder War, and I just finished that, and I'm already looking forward to book 4. For this entry, I wanted to try something different because it was quite an interesting story and it felt like something different as well. So this time I decided to use some stamps to set up this page, which I tend to do quite rarely because I just don't feel as comfortable with them as I do with the tapes. But I do think it turned out okay at least. So let's see what you think. Anyway, Black Powder War was an interesting and again quite different read. So far, it feels like every book in this series shows us a different type of travel, and this time our main characters, which are Captain Lawrence and his dragon Temeraire, start out in China, where they ended up in the second book, and now they have new orders to move home. However, after a fire on board of their transport ship, they can't use that one to travel, and they decide to head out overland instead, rather than waiting around for months to fix the problem. Thus, we follow along a journey through the desert and through treacherous mountains, where we not only meet different cultures of people, but also feral dragons as well. And as usual in this series, there are some political discussions as well. There are some mysteries that we need to solve to find out what's going on, and it ends up including a heist and then a huge war effort that we weren't expecting at the beginning of the book. So you can probably tell that this book was anything but boring. Once more, I really enjoyed the discussions between our main protagonists in this series. Because after their time in China, the dragon, Temeraire, has a few philosophical questions about how dragons are treated and how they should be treated, and also has some new ideas that he wants to have freedoms for dragons in the UK as well. Lawrence understands his ideas, but he also knows that it will be very, very difficult to get anybody to change their picture of the dragons, which they treat more like a useful animal than like an actual intelligent being. And so he tries to not have his dragon get his hopes up too high, but it's quite interesting to see the dynamic between the two, because Lawrence actually does think about how dragons are treated as well, because he's been seeing how the Chinese treat their dragons, which is very different culturally, of course, from the UK. So I'm really, really looking forward to see where this discussion will lead us in the future, because at the end of this book, we're getting close to being home again. So I'm sure that we will be seeing what happens there. And I'm very, very happy that I know that the next book is already waiting on my shelf to be read sometime very soon. So anyway, if you're looking for some lovely adventure in a historical setting that is an alternate history of the Napoleonic Wars with dragons, I highly recommend you check out this series because it has become a really quick favorite for me. And so far, all of the books have been either 5 stars or really close to 5 stars. So yeah, let's head over to my progress pages and start out with those as well. I have decided that I do only want to count books for my goal of 60 reads, and I have been counting magazines for the last few months, but it's been going so well that I'm sure that I will reach the book goal as well without the magazines. So I'm gonna not put a tick in here right now because I have 4 ticks from magazines that I'm kind of using for the next 4 books that I read. But of course I can put down a tick below here for the May read. It does feel great to start out with a physical book as well and make progress this early in the month. So in the bookshelf, this one goes in violet, and it's based on my new books page because I got it for Christmas. And with that done, we can of course head over to the book bingo pages, where it fits in nicely because I was still having an open spot for the third book of a series, which this one is. So I'm going to put it in here before heading over to the theme bingo, where it fits in as well, since I already mentioned it plays for quite a bit of the storyline in a desert, while they have to cross it with a dragon and a caravan, so it feels reasonable enough to put it down as playing in a desert. Next up, it of course goes into the monthly goal page as my physical read for May, which is great to start that off this early. And then I already painted Dear Temeraire last time I read a book of the series, so I'm just gonna put down the number of the book next to it, and I don't have to do any new animal drawings for this one. Unfortunately, it doesn't give us a new entry as author or title because spots are getting really close at this point. Actually, I take that back. I realized later, after filming this, that I can put it down as Black Powder War for the title 4P, so I fixed that after doing this. Anyway, we also need to go on to the series tracker and put it down in my Temeraire series, which is a total of 9 books long, so I'm only in a third, but going strong so far. And finally, it also counts for my reading challenge. Even though I didn't pick it up for that on my TBR, it does fit really well because I want a book that plays in nature or historical for the Stinging Nettle, and it does both of those for at least a part of the book, so I'm gonna put it down there, and we can grow all 3 stinging nettles because we already have the water supply set up for them. And there we go, continuing nicely in the reading challenge as well. Next up, I really wanted to get into an interesting arc that I received, so an advanced reader's copy, which is Dear Missing Friend by Susan McGuirk. This felt like it fit pretty well at this point because it is in a historical setting as well, and it's told solely through letters, and it plays in a similar time to the Temeraire storyline. And Captain Lawrence does write quite a lot of letters as well, so why not go with letters for this one? So far I haven't read any letter-only books, but as this one tells the story of a strong woman finding her way, it sounded great, and it turned out to be great as well. For the journal entry, I decided to focus on the letter topic and design my spread as kind of a letter and all around the topic of letter sending as well. So I hope you enjoy it. Anyway, it was a really easy book to get into. Our main protagonist, Katherine, is an Irish girl that emigrates to America with her 2 brothers, as they all hope to make their life better there. At the beginning, they don't have it easy, because there's a lot of prejudice against them for their Irish accents, but eventually one of the brothers manages to buy some land to be a farmer, and the other one finds a job as well. Katherine herself really wants to be a teacher and find a job as a governess, but as she cannot find a suitable position, mostly due to her Irish accent, she ends up working at a hotel instead. This is also where she meets the man that she falls in love with. And from that point onward, it feels a bit like a love story for a while, but then things turn sour and the struggle continues for poor Katherine while she still tries to find her way. So in the end, we follow her exchanges with all of her friends and 2 men, between whom she is a bit torn, but she ends up marrying one of them. Unfortunately, it probably wasn't the best decision to go ahead with that, and after a while she has to struggle to really find her place in this world. I really enjoyed reading the book, and it was a nice and quick read for sure. Some parts of the story dealt with darker themes of loss and depression though, so just as a content warning in case that is something that you don't want to read. But overall it was a beautiful story and it felt very realistic. Probably because the author actually was inspired by her own family history and one of her ancestors that actually emigrated to America like Katherine did. So if you're interested in reading letters, that tell you the story of a strong woman in a difficult historical time where she has to fight to actually find a life that she wants to live, then you should definitely check this book out. I really liked it. With that said, let's move to the front of my reading journal and fill out my trackers. As I mentioned, I won't put down a tick for this book because it's the second of the 4 ticks that I made for magazines in the past. So we can move on to the bookshelf and color it in over here. I did get this ebook as an ARC just a month ago, so it is on my new bookshelf, and as an ebook it's gonna get this lovely reddish color over here. So let's fill that out before heading on. In terms of the book bingo, it does fill up a quite nice place here as well, because I can put it down as a book between 100 and 200 pages, with 194 just within this range, which gives me 2 more bingos to go on this board, but of course we're going for a full blackout. And in terms of the themes, it also fits in really well for my first bingo, as it is in a historical setting, and I can put it down for that. And that's it for this book, because actually I cannot put it down for anything of the other challenges, as it just doesn't fit anywhere anymore. I'm making too much progress, I think. I then got the third book from the library, and it turned out to be very different to the last lovely story. Since I liked Babel, I wanted to read another of R.F. Kuang's books. And The Puppy War sounded interesting. A fantasy based on historical events in China around a girl fighting to find a way to survive? That just really does sound intriguing to me. And in the beginning it started with a rough but quite realistic academy setting that I really enjoyed reading about, as it helped me understand the world much better. I expected some political themes, of course, but I wasn't quite ready for the amount of gore and war crimes described and committed in the later parts. Additionally, our main character is not really a good person. Sometimes she tries to be, but mostly she just looks for a way to survive and secure her own position, and in the end, for vengeance. That was quite difficult to read for me, as I wanted to like her and understand her, but at the same time I just couldn't believe how far she was willing to go. But let me tell you a bit more about the story. Our main character, Rin, is a war orphan that has been raised by an uncaring family and is about to be married off, when she decides to study for and take a special exam to qualify for the prestigious war academy of the country. This seems to her to be the only chance she can get out of this life that she doesn't like. She gets in and she starts at the academy, but only to find out that people there don't accept her either, and it's not easy to get through classes and exams. Even before she graduates, though, another war breaks out and all the students are sent to assist the military, which sees Rin sent to a special group of magical fighters. Overall, I found it really hard to rate this book, because the parts felt so different to me, and I will say the writing was definitely good throughout, but I will also say that you shouldn't pick this book up if you have a problem with cruelty or detailed descriptions of horrific war crimes and the gore they entail. It was very dark. It's not a happy or uplifting story for sure. But if you do want to explore the dark depths of what humans are capable of, then this might actually be a good fit. As I said, it was really not easy to rate this book, so some parts were almost a 5-star for me, but other parts I didn't really enjoy or like, so I decided on giving it 3.5 stars in the end, but it did intrigue me enough that I do want to continue on with the series and find out where Rin's journey continues. So, yeah. With that said, let's go ahead and look into my progress pages as well. This book still doesn't get ticked off as another read book because I'm still working on the magazines, but almost done at this point. But of course it does go on my bookshelves, on the unowned shelf. As I said, I had it from the library. So I'll put it in there in this lovely red, and then we can move on to the bingo pages. The first bingo is almost filled up already, and there's not a lot of things left to fill in there, and it doesn't fit, so I can only put it on the theme bingo, because the academy and quite a bit of the storyline in the war as well do play on mountains, so I think that's fine enough for this theme. Moving on all the way to my alphabet challenges, we can put down R.F. Kuang as the author for K, because that space is still open, and the title doesn't fit at this point, so we're just gonna go ahead and look into my series pages. The first page is already filled up, so I put it down on the second page, and I can tick off the first book here. And finally, I really wanted to pick this book up this month because it fits really well for the bright, colorful cover prompt that I'm still needing for my spring reading challenge. And with that one, I can get the Gerbera plant, and so I'll just put it in here and fill up this page even further. One more plant left to go, and tiny spoiler, the next book is gonna address that one. So let's head on over to my fourth book of the month. The fourth book that I finished was the audiobook for the month, and I chose Night Magic by Leigh and Henion for that one, which I had stumbled across while searching for audiobooks in my library. This is a non-fiction book that describes the author's experiences while trying to learn more about nature at night and what night means for us humans. She is quite interested in nature already, but so far has been reluctant or maybe even scared to go out and explore at night. After the pandemic, though, she decides to finally put in more effort into this topic and travels to a few biological events of nighttime species, ranging from glowworms to bats to mushrooms. And with each of these steps, she learns to appreciate the darkness more, and she sees the issues with light pollution on these nocturnal species, and also on us humans, and that is what she also wants the reader to come to understand. In the beginning, I was really interested in listening to these stories and events, and I definitely learned a lot of interesting facts about nature at night, but after a while, it did feel a bit repetitive and drawn out. In my opinion, there is too much focus on the people at the events and their backgrounds and how people view those night creatures and how humans deal with them. And instead, I would have rather liked a bit more depth about the animals. And maybe not just single species that exist in some part of the US, but rather a bit more information about the groups of animals they belong to. So just to give it a bit more context. In any case, it was quite good to listen to while being out for walks, and as I said, I definitely learned something, and it does give you a certain appreciation of all the night critters that you don't usually see. So I'll give the book 3 stars for a solid read. And I will say that it did inspire me to think about going out at night and looking a bit more into what animals we have around here, even though they're certainly not going to be the ones that I just read about. And if you don't know a lot about animals and are interested in what moves around you at night, maybe this book is for you as well. So yeah, I won't draw it out much more than that, because either this type of nonfiction is for you or it's not. And with that said, let's move over to look at my goal spreads again. This is the final book that I'm not allowed to tick off yet, because this is the book number 25 that I read this year. And with that said, the magazines are now taken care of, and the next book I can definitely use and put in here again. And moving on to the bookshelves, it of course goes on the unowned shelf as well. And since it is the audiobook of the month, it will get a nice, lovely pink coloring in here. As a non-fiction book, it doesn't have any space left on my book bingo pages, so I'm just gonna skip over these. And I will also say that I did look at the alphabet for a second, but neither the author nor the title still fit in any of the empty spots, because these pages fill up quite nicely already. Nonetheless, I did say so at the beginning of this book. This book also fits for my spring reading challenge, and it fills in the last prompt that I still have left over, which is for the calendula plant and needs flowers or plants on the cover of the book. So that definitely counts for this prompt. So let me fill in all 3 calendula flowers, and with that we have finished this challenge spread as well. If you haven't seen my reading challenge update video, then I will leave that linked up here as well for you, because I have told a little story through all of these plants that I was collecting and all the books I read for them. And if you want to check that out, then go ahead and watch that video next. Anyway, back to the books, so let's head on to the next one. It seems like this month I'm really up for some historical fiction about amazing women finding their place in life. The next book, A True Account by Katherine Howe, is the story of a female pirate in the 1700s, and that was a lot of fun to read as well. I actually hadn't heard of this book, but came across it on my Edinburgh trip last year, and it just sounded great when I picked it up and read the back cover. Spoiler, it was also a really great read, so that worked out well. It is written in 2 different storylines, both following women in historical times. Our aspiring pirate lady, Henion, starts out as a maid working in a port town and gets dragged into piracy through watching a hanging and helping out a young lad. She tells her story in the first-person perspective, and it is quite fascinating and fun to follow her learning the trade, so to speak. When she starts out, she's just a young girl of 17 years, and she's very thin and has to hide and pretend to be a boy to go on board of the ship that she travels on. And that makes for quite an interesting story, since she doesn't really know what she's doing and she has to hide who she really is for most of the whole setup. And then there's the second timeline, which is about 200 years later, when history professor Marion is shown the manuscript that Henion wrote by herself by one of her students. Both Professor Marion and her student, who is also a woman, are intrigued by the pirate story as well, just as we are as a reader, and they set out to look for Henion's past and Henion's treasure that might still be hidden somewhere. But I won't tell you if they find anything, because that would be spoiling a lot of the fun turns of the story. In any case, I really enjoyed the read, and switching between the 2 points of view made it even more engaging, so that I got through it quite quickly. I also found it very interesting to read about seafaring once more, because I am a bit into boats and sailing, at least in theory, and this was a fun exploration of pirating and sailing along these coasts. Also, there were quite a few turns in the story that I didn't see coming, so that was really well done, and overall it's a solid 4 stars for me. With that said, let's put this book down in my overview pages as well. And this one is the first one that I actually get to actively tick off again, because by now I've waited for the 4 ticks that I needed to fill out the magazines. Of course, it also goes down in the bookshelves, and since it's a book from my physical TBR, I finally get to color in one more book on my huge shelf over here. Moving on to my bingo pages, it does fit into the second bingo of themes, as it does contain the typical parrot that you need for a pirate story, and so I can use it to fill out the space for containing a bird. Of course, this bird also has to go down on my animal collection page, so I quickly drew one so that I can put him in here as well. And it was quite funny to always have this French parrot flying around and calling out things, so I think he fits in here just as well. And while Katherine Howe doesn't fit into my author alphabet, I can still put down the title for T for the true in a true account. And with that said, let's move on to the next book, which is also the final book for this month. And with that one, I did start another series, one that you have surely already heard about, as it is all over the internet at the moment. Since I do like RPGs, I knew that I had to try it, and I wasn't disappointed. It was a fun and quick read, even though it wasn't all amazing. I'm talking about Dungeon Crawler Carl by Matt Dinniman, which was the first lit RPG that I read, and quite a ride at that. In case you really haven't heard about this series, here's a quick setting. Carl is outside in a snowstorm in the middle of the night trying to catch his ex-girlfriend's cat when suddenly all hell breaks loose. Within a moment, all buildings around him are flattened to the ground by aliens, and the survivors are being told that they can descend into a dungeon to reclaim their planet. Since Carl is outside in the cold but not dressed for it, he doesn't have a lot of options, and so he ends up going down into the dungeon and taking the cat with him. There he becomes basically a real-life RPG character, and so does the cat, which makes them a party of two, and we get to follow them as they fight to survive in this really surreal world, and also start to learn more about what just happened to them and about the aliens that set up this whole game and who are actually televising it across the whole galaxy as a strange form of entertainment that almost feels like reality TV. And in the end, it just feels like people moving through a video game dungeon and trying to get as much loot as possible and somehow survive the boss fights. So that was quite something different to read, but also a lot of fun and a really easy read as well. The mechanics made sense to me since I do play RPGs and I do feel quite confident with them. And I did enjoy the little hints at deeper world building, with some concepts such as the NPCs and monsters in-game having real lives and families too. And I did feel like the humor was a bit much sometimes, but I read it as being meant that way, and kind of like the aliens trying to appropriate what humans would find funny, but I feel like Carl doesn't quite like the humor as much either. So I think for me it's just a bit of a setting piece. It is a bit gory at some points, so it's probably not for everybody, but I will say that the storyline and the setting has intrigued me enough that I would like to read on right away. Unfortunately, I will have to wait quite a few weeks for the second book to become available from the library because there's so many people waiting already. So yeah, well. With that said, of course, this gives me another tick on my read books list. And moving on to the bookshelves, I also get to fill in another book on my unowned shelf, which again gives me 3 books for this month. So it seems like this is always the same amount, which I find quite funny, to be sure. Anyway, we do get to move on quite quickly after that because there's not that many empty spaces in my bingos at this point. And since I already have quite a few cat characters on my animal companion list, I decided not to include an animal that's not really written as a real animal at this point, even though it was very fun to read The Cat Princess Donut. And with that said, we can go ahead to the alphabet challenge, where we can actually fill something in both pages, because Matt Dinniman still counts for D, and the Dungeon Crawler Carl, of course, can fill the C spot on the title page as well. And since this is the first book in a series, we do get to also put down another series tracker in my series pages. And now I can tick off the first book and we'll see how far I can get with my library in this series as well. So yeah, that was the last book that I read. But of course, I still have one magazine to go for in this month as well. And again, I'm being really bad at this and finishing the magazine last. But at least I did finish it, so I picked one more of my lovely nature journals, this time from our local conservation group, which is called the LBV. I've been actively working with them for the last few years, so it's always really nice to stay up to date on what's going on in my region. And this time the magazine focused on swamps and their specific properties and restoration. While I did know that they are a special and important habitat type, I wasn't aware just how much carbon dioxide they can store if they are natural, meaning still wetland. But unfortunately, most of the swamps around here have been drained to make space for agriculture, and that has created a lot of degradation in their systems, which we are now trying to restore, of course. And there are quite a number of conservation areas that have the option to do so. So yeah, this was a really interesting read once again, and I definitely learned quite a few new things about swamps and wetlands, which is always useful, I think. So let's go ahead and put this magazine down as the monthly magazine for May, which gives me a lovely tick to round out this month. And of course it also goes onto my bookshelf, on which my little magazine tower over here is filling up nicely as well. And then we can head over to my monthly goals, because of course I can also put it down here for my May goal of reading the magazine. And that's pretty much it for this month. But I do want to show you one more little page that I have in my reading journal here, which is my reading challenge update page. So in case you haven't seen my last video already, I will link it at the end of this video for you, because I have, of course, finished my spring reading challenge this month and managed to take care of all the plants that I was collecting and collect the full free seeds for each of them, which is great. I also had a storyline for the whole challenge, so if you're interested in hearing more about that, as I said, I will link the video at the end of this one. But I will say one more time that I am planning on doing another challenge quite soon, because when these plants that I collected in the spring challenge are fully grown, then of course I need to harvest them, and then I need to use them in some potions. So the summer challenge will be coming up starting in July, so it won't be long until I tell you what the challenge is. And it will be about reading books to find the recipes to make some potions based on the plants that we collected. If that sounds interesting, then you should definitely subscribe and stick around so that you won't miss it. And with that said, I'm done with everything that I read in May. So thank you very much for being here with me, and I hope you enjoyed this lovely video as well. Have a great rest of your day and go read something nice. Bye!